If you will indulge me, I just wanted to understand the genesis of the name Regulating for Growth. Who actually came up with that? Rachel Reeves irritates me when she spreads it around the chamber liberally. So who actually thought that was a sensible name?
It's a very good question where the genesis of it was. If I'm honest, I don't know. I couldn't give you, so I hesitate to sort of speculate. I think this is used more broadly than just in the political arena. And I think, but what it's trying to get to, if I sort of back up a bit in terms of, sort of I think where the intent of what you're asking is there a zero-sum conflict between regulation and growth? Or is there a role in which regulation, well-crafted regulation, can actually help enable, foster growth? And there's one example I'll use. I mean, I worked for a while in the private sector in Asia, and I was always struck when I went to supermarkets in that part of the world, and various countries, China, Malaysia, and the like, and they'd often have, along with the price, a little flag of the country where the food was from. And this was in the early 2010s, and I often thought, maybe it's all about carbon miles. It was very fashionable at the time. Speaking to my colleagues who I worked with, the locally employed staff, they were like, no. We want to know the food is coming from as far away as possible because we've got no confidence in the food regulatory standards in our country. And there were, at that time, there were lots of controversies about the way in which artificial dyes or lead had been used. Literally sometimes, sort of the colouring to make tomatoes look vibrant. And the thing that really struck me then was well-crafted regulation, I emphasise the word well-crafted, can make a big difference in terms of how effective markets can work. Because essentially what happened there is because of the failure of regulation of public institutions and state capacity, people were happily importing food instead. And so I think that to me is that's what I take from the phrase.
Well, I think in your example, Gareth, and thank you for that, I think labelling is a different issue to regulation. I would argue you deregulate for growth, you don't regulate for growth. And when I read quite rightly, the NAO sets out here that regulators are primarily set up to correct market failures, protect consumers and the public and the environment. So aren't you asking, by talking about regulating for growth, aren't you asking leopards to be kind to their prey? Is that what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, let me come at this in another way. Look at some of the reforms that have happened to the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority, over the last year. One of the complaints, concerns that a lot of businesses that I spoke to back in early 2023-24 had with the CMA. I mean, obviously people will complain about decisions when it goes against them, and that's sort of par for the course. I always say you're never going to love your regulator because they're trying to often achieve, as you say, market failure issues. But one of the big complaints was as much how regulators went around their business, how the CMA went around this business. And the concern there was just the amount of time it took, for example. So there was one merger case, I think the investigation took over 24 months. That's just not a commercial time frame. And so the criticism it's as much around not just the what, but the how regulators operate. Are they operating in a way which is frankly proportionate to the decision in front of them? There's a way in which you can always gold plate what you do. Are they operating at a pace that allows people to make commercial decisions within that framework? Is it predictable? Can you actually work out which way the regulator is going to jump? Because actually that is better because you can plan that into investment decisions up front. So I do think that, and this is why I'm really interested in the way in which this action plan has been framed around administrative costs, because it's about how regulators operate as much as what they do.
Right, okay. So, when I asked a question of the Secretary of State for Business and Trade about the number and proportion of senior civil servants in his department that have A, historic, and B, current directorships listed on Companies House, in July 23, there was one. So I'm asking you really, I think, I'm trying to get at the question, does your department really understand what you're trying to achieve? And I'm going to go on in a minute to ask you to define what you consider to be delivering growth. But let's just get at the heart of it. I mean, I'm not sure, I think by calling it regulating for growth, you've missed the point. I'm not sure your department is fit to be overseeing the delivery of growth. And from everything I've read, I don't think you've accurately defined what you consider growth to be. And if you haven't defined it, given that the regulators, and I read in here that they're engaging with you reluctantly, which is hardly surprising because they've all built up huge little empires that they want to protect. I'm not sure you've got your message. I'm not clear, and I've been in the city for 20 years. I run multiple businesses, and I read these documents. I'm not clear what you define growth as. So I just think it's a bit of a mess, and really you've summed it up by what I would describe as an oxymoron, which is regulating for growth. So I think you're trying to push water uphill, and if you really want growth, then you need to deregulate and you need to return to what London used to be when it was the preeminent financial centre in Europe.
Okay, Rupert,
to caveat emptor. So can you define, I mean, what do you consider to be delivering growth?
There's a collection of questions in there. Let me try and work my way through them all. Do I think my department has the capability and capacity to deliver on the growth agenda? I think my main thing to say is probably not for me to say. I'd go and speak to some businesses, and there'll be obviously mixed views. The one thing as ever with any government department, any organisation, the thing I have focused on in my time as Permanent Secretary is to make sure we bring the business voice into the department. So, for example, I spend 20-25% of my time at least speaking with chief execs of businesses and making sure I'm engaging with people to understand the business voice about what this means. Not necessarily doing everything the business wants, but actually about making sure we can have frank conversations. You raised a point around directorships and the number of people in the department with company directorships. That doesn't surprise me because, frankly, there'll be conflicts of interest. So I'd be surprised if people were on company boards.
I'm still not clear. How do you define economic growth?
Sorry, I was working way through your questions. But if I look at the people in the department and their business experience, I haven't got the stats in front of me, but a significant number of people have significant amounts of business experience. So, for example, on my board, one of the Director Generals was at a major corporate law firm for 30 years. I spent the first 10 years of my career in the private sector, privatising businesses in Eastern Europe. I've worked in a major insurer in Asia for 2 years, AIA, working directly to Mark Tucker. We could go, I could go through the list just to give you a flavour of sort of the business experience. In terms of, how we define growth, and this brings into the broader Treasury definitions here. I have a very simple approach to this. What is the economic growth? It's growing GDP. We know the challenge facing our country. Since the financial crisis, growth has flatlined, frankly, when you unpick it. You can look at it in different ways. You can do GDP per head. You can look at productivity. You can look at real household disposable incomes. Whichever way you cut it, performance has been poor. And certainly if you compare, say, the trends in the 20 years running up to the financial crisis compared to the 20 years afterwards,
so for these
we've been
regulators,
far higher. So the heart of this is what...
These regulators, what do they need to deliver for you that you will consider to be successful growth?
They need to help...
Because I'm not clear.
They need to help their sectors flourish and grow. So if you look at, say, look at the work of the Civil Aviation Authority, which was led ably when I worked with the Department for Transport by Richard Moriarty. They focus, yes, obviously on safety, that's an absolute core role, but also thinking about how new technologies could be introduced into that sector. So, for example, the work on drones, which is now flourishing sector both in terms of domestic civilian use, but also military, obviously, capability as well. So, in all these regulators, what we're looking for is how they can help support a flourishing sector.
What do you consider success and what do you consider failure in terms of GDP growth? Have you told them that?
In terms of quantified numbers?
Yeah.
No. What we are doing and working our way through...
How do they judge whether they've been successful or not? What
we are working our way through is the strategic steers and the growth guidance we'll be issuing regulator by regulator, so I'm making it specific. The challenge, what I think we have to do here is break down sort of the top level success, GDP, into what that means specifically in the individual regulator. Again, let me take the example of CAA. You risk of spurious accuracy by trying to sort of tie back GDP changes to the regulator, long and variable lags. There, the growth goals will be around third runway at Heathrow. You can see the underlying evidence around the impact that makes.
Okay, so I'm still not clear, but over what time are you looking for them to deliver this? I mean, what's your time frame for delivery of this? So I'm not clear on the definition, but assuming they are, which I'm far from certain they are, what is the time frame over which you want this delivered? Because if you don't know those objectives, they can't deliver them for you.
Yeah. So how do we work our way through this? With individual regulators, we will set a strategic steer, which is over the course of the Parliament. Then more tangibly, we'll have an at least annual, normally biannual meeting of the Minister and the key regulator, and annual growth goals that then set out specific things that they need to do. The key issue on terms of regulating for growth is around the actions and the behaviours they need to take. So the timelines will depend on the reforms we're asking them to do. Look at the CMA with what the changes we've done there. We've changed the senior leadership through the change in the chair, new strategy, their sort of approach around pace, proportionality, predictability and the like. And we're already seeing changes in terms of how that's operating with businesses and the feedback I get from inward investors.
No more questions, Geoffrey.
So just to delve a little bit more into Mr. Lowe's questions, when your minister is seeing the key regulators, do you also obtain an opinion from the sector leaders relating to that regulator, and do you also then balance that with any consumer groups that may also be involved with that regulator? So what's your feedback, Luke, before you see the regulator?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I mean, so there's two ways in which we'll do this, and I might bring Caleb in on the consumer side. On businesses, underpinning the industrial strategy, we've got